Mr. Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, ambassadors, members of the diplomatic corps, Mr. Gil Husky, Chief of State Protocol, good morning. It is my honor and pleasure to welcome you on behalf of Massuah, the International Institute for Holocaust Studies, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on the occasion of the International Holocaust Remembrance Day 2022. On November 1st, 2005, a resolution was taken by the United Nations General Assembly designating the 27th of January as the annual International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Today, 77 years since the end of the Second World War, the Holocaust is still an open wound in the heart of the Israeli society. Our belief is that the passing time has not failed to diminish the importance of remembering the Holocaust. In fact, the opposite is true. As the years pass, with the dwindling of the Holocaust survivors, our obligation as Jews and human beings is to preserve that memory so that the atrocities will never be forgotten or repeated.
Thank you very much, Mr. Joseph Fait, the chairman of Massuah, Honorable Prime Minister, management of Massuah, excellencies, honorary consuls, colleagues, members of the diplomatic corps. As the Chief of State Protocol of the State of Israel, who works on a daily basis with the ambassadorial corps in the State of Israel, and as a son of a Holocaust child refugee, and a grandson of a grandmother who was tortured and murdered in the forests of Minsk during the Holocaust, it's always heartwarming to witness this community of ambassadors and heads of mission showing up in large numbers to share this collective grief of the Jewish people and the people of Israel. I would like to especially thank the Massuah International Institute for Holocaust Studies for annually hosting this event on the occasion of the UN-declared International Day of Commemoration in Memory of the Victims of the Holocaust. It gives me great honor and pride to invite the Prime Minister of the State of Israel, His Excellency Naftali Bennett, to deliver the opening and key address for this event today.
Thank you very much, Gil, and I want to thank all of you, the ambassadors and the diplomatic corps for showing up in big numbers. It matters for us, and I appreciate you all for joining me in marking this very important occasion. Today marks the 77th year since the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, when 7,000 Jews were saved, but 6 million Jewish men, women, and children had already perished. While we can't fully process the cruelty of this magnitude, you just can't, we can only understand the Holocaust one story at a time. And one of those stories is the story of a Jewish boy called Eli. He was 15 years old when the Holocaust began. He was the eldest child of the Rodzynek family in Poland, which had his mom Gittel, his father Moshe, and two younger brothers, Shaul and Yaakov. Now, they lived on a Polish village on the border of Germany. So on September 1st, 1939, at the very beginning of the war, their village was conquered right away by Germany. And within a few days on Yom Kippur, the Nazis summoned all the Jewish men to the town square to go supposedly to work. Eli, who, as I told you, was 15 years old, he was very sharp, and he understood or thought or supposed that it's not work where they're taking all the men. And so he begged his father, Father, don't go to the village square. And he managed for a while to stop his father from going. But at the end, his father said, look, it's only work, I'm going to work. And he ran to the truck as the truck was moving away and sort of jumped on the truck so he doesn't miss out on this. Eli never saw his father again. Afterwards, Eli, with his mother and two younger brothers, fled eastward to try and evade the Germans. And within Poland, he, for the entirety of the Holocaust, for the 5 years of the Holocaust, he basically hid his family in the woods, in the wilderness. His family had a Jewish accent, a Yiddish accent, and also more Jewish faces. He had a sort of a non-Jewish face. He had blue eyes and looked Polish. So, and he didn't have he knew how to speak Polish without a Jewish accent. So what he did was he hid them in the woods, and every day Eli, who hid the fact that he was Jewish, went out to work with Polish farmers, and then he would return in the evening to the forest with food scraps and to feed his family. And every 2 or 3 weeks, he would move his family from one hiding place to another. Towards the end of the war, weeks before liberation, as Eli was on his way back to the hiding place, this time he didn't move his family for a few weeks. So he was on his way back. He saw a group of Polish boys walking in the opposite direction. They had a bad look in their eyes, and they started laughing at Eli. And they said to him, "Eli, we murdered your family." Eli ran back as quickly as possible to the hiding place where his family was. And when he got there, he saw his mom and 2 younger brothers murdered. This is after 5 years that this 15-year-old and ultimately older boy, managed to keep them alive for the almost entire Holocaust. A short time later, the Russians liberated the area. For those who survived, the Holocaust never ended. There's no such thing as freedom from the horrors they endured. Defeating the Nazis did not bring back Eli's mother, and didn't return his childhood, and didn't bring back his family. After the Holocaust, Eli met a young woman called Clara in Poland. She also lost her entire family in the Holocaust. She was hiding as a Christian throughout the years. They got married and had 2 boys, David and Moshe. Moshe is my wife's father and grandfather of my children, Jonathan, David, Abigail, and Michal. My daughter, Michal Clara, is named after Grandma Clara, and my other daughter, Abigail Elia, is named after Saba Eli, Grandpa Eli, the boy I'm talking about. I had the privilege to know Eli. He was a tough guy, didn't speak a lot, and the horror was always in his eyes, but he rebuilt a family here in Israel. They came, and my children carry in their blood and name the memory of the Holocaust. Like a generation of young Jews in Israel and around the world, they carry a connection to the worst of human history, the darkest point in the history of mankind. But with that memory, they also carry strength for a strong future for the Jewish people, a future that I, as Prime Minister of Israel, I will do everything in my power to protect. The Jewish people fought their way out of the woods, and today we have a home. Being able to raise your children without the constant fear of being murdered should not be a privilege, but it is. We Jews made this world safer for ourselves. Those who continue to try to attack Jews, to murder Jews, must know the Jew is no longer a punching bag. We swing back, and we swing back hard. My friends, ambassadors, we may not be able to understand what it was like to live through the Holocaust. We may never know what it means to live in a forest for years in fear for the life of your family, to hide your Jewish identity and pray that no one sees that you might have a slight accent. but we can embrace the lessons the Holocaust has taught us. Don't take freedom for granted, cherish it. Don't take injustice for granted, challenge it. Don't be a bystander to cruelty, fight it. The world must learn from the horrors of the Holocaust and do what's necessary to ensure that humanity does not succumb ever again to the evil that we've seen. When we hear the Iranian regime's daily calls to annihilate the state of Israel, as we speak, they continue talking about murdering and destroying the state of Israel, the Jewish state. And when we see their rapid progression towards nuclear weapons, indifference is silent acceptance. A country who talks about annihilating the Jewish state should not be a legitimate partner for anything. When Jews continue to be targeted for being Jews, both the individual Jew or the collective Jew, the Jewish state, indifference is silent acceptance. After the Holocaust rose a sovereign nation that has the power to defend itself. Israel is the Jewish people's defiance over indifference. Today we're free and strong, an independent state. On this occasion, International Holocaust Memorial Day, let us honor those who perished by combating indifference with an initiative, in action with engagement, by combating injustice with truth. You see, never again is more than just a hashtag. It's a call to action. It is our vow that the Jewish people will never again be powerless, never again be voiceless, and never again be homeless. The horrors of the Holocaust cannot be erased, but we can build a good future for ourselves and for others. Am Yisrael Chai. Thank you very much, my friends.
Your sister held her infant daughter and her 5-year-old son.
Yes. The SS man came and told her, "Hand the children to your mother." Then she said, "No, they're mine, I won't hand them over." There was an argument. He took the little girl and handed her to my mother, and he took the boy also, by force. He took him.
And they're no longer alive.
No longer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister, for your emotional personal story, personal family story, and also your powerful message. The Prime Minister will have to leave us shortly and will have time to attend only the first part of the ambassadors' panel discussion, which will commence right now. The Holocaust, being such an immense event, has so many facets and aspects to it. In these days of remembrance, one discovers each year a new angle, a new story, a new nuance. We have asked 4 ambassadors, colleagues of ours, to share with us their perspective of the Holocaust, or at least one of their perspectives. The first intervention will be by Ambassador Tom Nides, the newly arrived US Ambassador to Israel, who will share with us some angles that relate to the task of a US Ambassador in Israel vis-a-vis the inevitable topics that he has to deal with, like Holocaust and anti-Semitism. Ambassador Nides, please, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Prime Minister Bennett, for your exceptionally touching remarks. and most importantly, for your leadership. The coalition you lead is something we should all be proud of. Its diversity and leadership makes Israel stronger. And thank you to our many other participants today from the government of Israel and the diplomatic corps. Thanks especially to our host, Massuah, and thank you, Chairman Feit, for convening us in this virtual forum, though I very much look forward to meeting next year in person as it's tradition. Your mission is to teach the Holocaust, not just as history, but as something everyone can relate to in contemporary society. And with anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial and distortion a growing danger around the world, this mission has never been more relevant or important. I want to take the moment to recognize the bravery in the leadership of Rabbi Charlie Citron Walker during the terrifying hostage situation at Congregation Beth Israel in Colleyville, Texas, less than 2 weeks ago. I had the opportunity personally to speak to the rabbi and express my deepest respect for his leadership during this incredible crisis. Combating anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial and distortion is a priority for me personally as a U.S. ambassador. It is also a heartfelt priority for President Biden, a man with a long history of friendship with Israel and the Jewish community. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to join you on this day of remembrance. For those of us who are assembled today, diplomats and public servants, today is the day to take stock and ask, are we closer this year to the world that understands the ramifications of the Holocaust? With every year, the events of the Holocaust can, for younger generations, be more and more remote, with fewer voices of survivors. At the same time, there are those who are disgusting, who manipulate our memories and data to spread disinformation for their own despicable ends, denying or distorting the enormity of the Holocaust, which murdered 6 million individual Jewish men, women, children, friends, mothers, fathers, daughters, sons, loved ones, all human beings. It remains our responsibility as leaders to educate our young people to confront the lies and hatred and to ensure that the future generations do not shy away from these painful truths. Fortunately, in this effort, like in so many others, Israel and the United States are finding strength working together. As the Biden administration enters the second year, the president, the Vice President Harris, Secretary Blinken, and others have made it a priority to advance the adoption and implementation of IRA, the working definition of anti-Semitism. Even last week, the passage of the UN resolution on combating Holocaust denial and distortion shows progress is being made. But we continue to focus on ever more aggressively on condemning and countering anti-Semitism in all forms, ensuring that physical security for the Jewish communities, investigating and prosecuting hate crimes, educating the public, especially young people, countering Holocaust denial and distortion. But even as the United States government takes these steps, sadly, we must confront the fact there is an alarming rise in anti-Semitism around the world, which has also manifested itself in our own community. Just 12 days ago, we had a terrorized congregation in Texas. And less than 3 years after one of the worst anti-Semitic attacks in U.S. history at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, we experienced a startling spike in anti-Semitism incidents last year. Synagogues were vandalized in Arizona and Illinois and New York and Utah and Alaska. Attackers shouted anti-Semitic threats to Jews eating at Los Angeles sushi restaurant, for wearing a kippah in Bell Harbor, Florida, and walking on the streets in Midtown Manhattan. All of this In addition to the dramatic increase in anti-Semitism on social media platforms since the COVID pandemic began, led President Biden to make it clear that, and I quote, "We must all stand together to silence these terrible and terrifying echoes of the worst chapter in the world history and to pledge to give hate no safe harbor." Clearly, my friends, we have more work to do. So let me use this occasion to recommit to work together for a world that always remembers the Holocaust, so that the future generations will continue to say, never again. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Knights. I would like to introduce our next speaker, Ambassador Ana Salomon of Spain, who devoted years of her professional diplomatic career to Holocaust remembrance and education. Among other titles, Ambassador Salomon was appointed as a special envoy of the Spanish government for relations with the Jewish community and organizations between the years 2005 and 2011, working intensively on Holocaust-related matters. Ambassador Ana Salomon will share with us her personal professional experience in this regard. Ambassador Salomon, please.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Haskell. I tried to share very briefly how my professional experience on Holocaust-related issues became something extremely important for me, not only as a professional, as a diplomat, but also as a human being. From the moment I was appointed a special envoy in 2005, one of my main areas of work was Holocaust remembrance and related issues, including education and research. In December 2004, my government had officially designated January 27 as the Holocaust Remembrance Day, and we were starting practically from scratch in the task of giving real content to this important decision. It was clear for us from the beginning that we wanted, among other things, a true state remembrance ceremony to convey a strong message. And so we celebrated our first state remembrance ceremony in January 2006 with the participation of the King and the Queen, the Prime Minister, and the main authorities of the country. And we continued to do so year after year with strong institutional support, involvement, and commitment. The memories I have from those years will stay with me forever. I will never forget the voices of the victims. I will not forget the violinist Jacques Strumsa, an Auschwitz survivor, playing Eli Eli, or the children of the Inga Vidal School singing Shema Israel, or the children of the Lycée Français singing Le Chant des Marais, or the children for different choirs and schools singing all together the Ode of Joy. I will not forget Amnon Weinstein and Shlomo Mintz in Madrid with their violins of hope. I will not forget all that candle lightings. But above all, I will never forget the Holocaust survivors who stayed with us, who helped us year after year. I will never forget their generosity in accepting, for instance, interviews by the Spanish media, interviews that sometimes were suddenly interrupted because the interviewer, the journalist, or the interpreter burst into tears. And I will never forget their generosity in meeting hundreds of Spanish children with their teachers and talking to them. I will never forget Jaime Vidal Cefija or David Galante, Auschwitz survivors, Patricia Weiss, daughter of Violeta Friedman, also Auschwitz survivor, Siegfried Meyer, who was in Auschwitz and Mauthausen, being a child, Jaime Bandor, a boy from the Budapest ghetto, saved by Angels and Breathe, Spanish diplomat, righteous among the nations, and so many others. I will never forget either what I felt when Yad Vashem was awarded in 2007 our Prince of Asturias Concord Prize. I will never forget when we managed to include the Holocaust for the first time in the Spanish education system, and so many teachers strongly committed, eager to receive training on Holocaust education and work with their pupils. And I will never forget that December 17, 2008, when Spain was admitted as a full member of the IRA after intense work and a process in which Israel was our mentor country together with France. Many unforgettable memories. I began by saying that my professional approach to the Holocaust became fundamental for me as a person. We diplomats are civil servants with all that this implies. Throughout our career, we like some positions more than others. We enjoy some of them more than others. And I think that the 6 years I devoted to Holocaust remembrance as a special envoy have been the most rewarding of my career as a diplomat, over 30 years now. Perhaps because of those life experiences and memories, perhaps because of the intense work undertaken, or perhaps because always, from the very beginning to the very last moment, I knew I was doing what I had to do, because I always felt that I was doing the right thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Salomon, for this very deep and powerful message that you shared with us. Our next speaker is a natural choice for such a panel. Ambassador Radu Ionid of Romania, who has dedicated decades of his adult life to the issue of the Holocaust. The ambassador has worked for 30 years in the Holocaust Museum in Washington, which turned out to be one of the most important Holocaust remembrance and research institutes in the world. Ambassador Ionid is also a holder of 2 PhDs, one on fascism in Romania and the second on the Holocaust in Romania. The ambassador chose the topic of his intervention as the Holocaust as a European project. Ambassador, please.
Good morning, everybody. Mr. Prime Minister, Your Excellencies, dear colleagues. It is an honor for me to be invited to speak to this ceremony, and I would like to extend my appreciation to my very good friends from the Massuah Institute and from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Israel for organizing this event. As time is limited, allow me please to go directly to the subject. Kindly mark my words. The Holocaust was a European project. I repeat, the Holocaust was a European project. While Nazi Germany was the engine, sometimes the brains of this continental mass murder, this would not have been possible without the involvement of many countries, be they members of the Axis, of the Allies, or a neutral one. Once more, every European country, whether it was independent, a satellite country, or occupied, as Prime Minister Bennett powerfully illustrated, bears its responsibility in this unprecedented tragedy. I'll give you one example. The tragedy of the Struma, the ship which left the port of Constanza on December 1941, carrying 791 passengers, Jews who were escaping the Romanian and German mass murderers. It is worth noting that after an engine failure, following the arrival in Istanbul port, the passengers of the Struma, with a handful of exceptions, were refused visas to enter Palestine by Great Britain and were not allowed to disembark by Turkey. After 72 days aboard, hundreds of souls, crammed together on a small old ship, the Struma was towed back to the Black Sea by the Turkish Navy on February 23, 1942, where it was torpedoed by a Soviet submarine the following morning. All the passengers and the crew perished, with one exception, my late friend David Stoliar. I wanted to recall this tragic episode in order to summarize the fact that members of the Axis, namely Romania and Nazi Germany, the Allies, namely Great Britain and Soviet Union, as well as Turkey as a neutral country, all these countries share the responsibility for the tragic fate of the people aboard the Struma, who were killed only because they were Jews. I believe this story is a strong and solid demonstration that the responsibility for the fate of the Jewish victims of the Holocaust is shared by many countries. These countries, which I already listed, and many others, could have done much more to avoid the tragic loss of life during the Holocaust. We need to remember this today in order to act jointly, I insist jointly, against the new waves of falsification of history, sometimes state-sponsored, and it's not my role now to list these countries, but I could, of Holocaust denial and anti-Semitism which we are facing. May the memory of the innocent victims be blessed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Next will be Ambassador Helen Sophie Deller Klein, Ambassador of Ecuador to Israel, who will share with us her unique family story of survival and regeneration. Ambassador Deller, who just recently assumed her office as her country's ambassador to Israel, has come to us from a very intensive business background, running a vast family conglomerate of construction and management, investing widely in corporate social projects in the fields of education, family, abused women, and children. Among other activities, the ambassador has been heavily involved and active in the Jewish community life in Ecuador. Ambassador Deller, please.
Thank you. Your Excellency, Prime Minister Bennett, ladies and gentlemen, as I look back on the history of my family and community, I can only assert how grateful and fortunate we are that Ecuador opened its doors to 5,000 Jews who fled and survived the Holocaust. Viktor Frankl said, "Every moment in life is a choice." My German grandfather chose to defy the Nuremberg racial laws by tearing down the notices from the window shops. Afterwards, he was severely beaten by the Nazis and made to stand naked holding a placard that said "Dirty Jew" in the town square for 24 hours. As a consequence, he desperately began to seek a path out of Europe. He found his, my father's, and my grandmother's escape in the form of an agricultural visa to Ecuador at the end of 1938. Already living in Ecuador, this extraordinary man was able to financially help the rest of the family to escape from Germany and the Holocaust, either to Palestine, Ecuador, or in the kinder transports. My Polish grandparents and mother also survived the Holocaust. They were the ones that kept quiet. The past month, I discovered that they worked in a slave camp. The only experience from that period that they ever shared is how they survived hidden in a pigsty saved by a Polish family in 1945. Afterwards, they escaped communism, and finally, helped by other family members, they arrived to Ecuador in 1948. Both families thrive and contribute to their nations. These are the Deller and Klein's unique stories. For me, to be standing here today as the ambassador of Ecuador to Israel, as the daughter of survivors, as the granddaughter of survivors, as the great-granddaughter of a survivor, as a member of Ecuador's Jewish community, I join the voices that loudly remembers those that perished, like my great-grandmother, Haya Weinig, recount the stories of the survivors of the Holocaust, and as well pay in tribute to the righteous among the nations. Edith Eger said, "We have the capacity to hate and the capacity to love. Which one we reach for is up to us. It is through love and the respect of human life that countries such as Ecuador became havens for Jews. It is our stories and our deeds that will make a difference and never allow another Holocaust. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you, Tom, Anna, Radu, and Helen for sharing with us 4 completely different aspects of such a complex issue in the professional life of any ambassador serving in Israel. Regardless of the number of times you discuss, read, or debate events related to the Holocaust, you never really manage to comprehend the magnitude of it. And I think every ambassador serving in Israel discovers that in the course of his service. With this, I would like to turn the screen back to our host, the Massuah Institute. Thank you very much.
The moment we reached Auschwitz, they said to us that the men should stand on the right with children over the age of 14, and women on the left with young boys and girls. They, the women, began walking while we were still standing, till they were almost completely out of view. I stood there with my son, who was only 12. I came up to a certain man. I didn't know who he was. He was dressed with a uniform of the German army, very elegant. And he asked me, "How old is the boy?" And at that moment, I couldn't lie, and I told him 12. And then he said to me, "Where is the mother?" I said. "She went to the left." And he said to the boy, "Run after your mother." And I went on walking to the right, and I saw how the boy was running. And I wondered to myself, how would he be able to find his mother there among all those people? And I caught sight of my wife. How did I recognize her? My little girl was wearing a red coat. And that red spot was the sign that she was there. And it became smaller and smaller. I walked to the right and never saw them again. They brought us to the market in the middle of the town.
There was fear and horror,
I ran away from there.
and all they asked for was a drop of water.
Where to go? Where now?
The Holocaust is personal for me. Both my parents are the only members of the family to survive. In many ways, this is also true for the entire Israeli society. For us, the Holocaust is an ever-present aspect, both in our identity and in the Israeli discourse. It is not a mere historical matter. In the Jewish tradition, there is an often quoted phrase, "A little bit of light can banish a lot of darkness." The commemoration of the Holocaust is not only a call for all of us to remember, but a call to take enlightened action to safeguard the fragile flame of our humanity. As the last generation of survivors are sadly passing away, this is our time to carry on the light of Holocaust remembrance. Ambassadors and heads of mission, please join us in lighting the candle. behalf of Massuah and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I want to thank you for having participated today in the International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And let's hope that next year we'll meet in person here at Massuah. Thank you.